You know, I don't really have a way of knowing if that's happening unless you tell me. Just yesterday, I had a slew of phone calls, folks. But 3 of them were from ladies. Every one of them said, when I asked them how they found out about helping seniors, they said they listen to the radio show, they read Senior Scene magazine, and they read the articles in Hometown News. And the reason I wanted to talk about this before I even introduced our guest or talk about sponsors or anything, because the only way to build up a successful radio network is for those of you that are listening to that person that's doing the show to either like it or not like it. If you don't like it, then you need to call me and tell me what I can do to change. But barring that, I'm assuming that you like what we're trying to do, and we're going to continue to do this. But it's so important that we build this network and that the network expands. And the way we do that is by you, our listeners, tell our other people that these shows are available and that they will help you with information. So please tell others about our network. It will be very, very much appreciated. But, you know, our purpose of our show is to inform, educate, and connect seniors and those that care for seniors to the resources that are available in Brevard County. Again, it takes a whole network to do this, too. It's not just me. It's not just somebody that knows what's going on, does it all, but we all work together. And it's just like our president talked about last night on his State of the Union message. If our country works together, our politicians, we're going to be a much better country. But if we continue to fight each other over the small things, nobody's going to be helped. And, you know, you can believe or not believe what everybody gets on that radio or television and tells you. You got to sift some of it out for yourself. Same with radio. But our show is made possible in part, a major part, by some of our major sponsors, which include August Velton Financial Associates, Chateau Madeleine, a new assisted living facility, Hibiscus Court, which has been around a long time, and a great assisted living facility, Solid Bite Dental Implants, the Eye Institute, Vitas Hospice, and Bill Johnson, elder law attorney, and Bill is my panelist today. Welcome, Bill.
Good afternoon, Joe.
No, good afternoon. It is afternoon. Today, Bill is going to talk about. In fact, I saw something I saw it on the internet, Bill, and it was your announcement that out at Wonder Senior Place you're going to do some briefings, and then I saw where Ruth Rhodes was going to do some briefings, and I saw where somebody else was going to do something over this week. But I was particularly intrigued by what you were going to talk about because it had to do with Medicaid, spousal refusal, some ways that we could do a better job of our planning with Medicaid, how the use of an attorney that has the know-how, that has the knowledge, can help people get what they need in the Medicaid system. And it's Medicaid, traversing that system is not easy, and even if you had to spend a little money to get it done, I as I read more about what you're doing, Bill, I see where the expenditure of a comparatively small amount of dollars could result in many, many dollars being saved.
That's true. Very true.
So I'm going to ask you to sort of give your 3 or 4 pitches over the course of our show this morning. I've got some questions, and when you get to that point where I need to ask a question, I'm going to do it. And because I'm thinking that the people listening will probably have the same questions as I did as I reviewed what you did. But how about starting out, and you pick which brief you want to do first, and then we'll go with that.
Well, let's talk about Medicaid first then. And when we talk about Medicaid, the program I deal with is the statewide managed care program that deals with long-term care. So we're talking about the program that deals with getting either home health care services, that is assisted living, or nursing home services for individuals. And to qualify for that, basically, you have to either be over 65 or you have to have a disability determination from the Social Security Administration. You have to be a U.S. citizen or a green card holder. You have to have a Social Security number. And you have to obviously have a medical need. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Either you have to be in a nursing home or what they call at risk of nursing home placement. And then there is an income and an asset test. And the Medicaid program I'm talking about is means tested. So it's a means tested program, and you have to satisfy those tests.
Okay. Let's go back to where you mentioned determining eligibility. You said you had to have a Social Security number. What about the people that, let's say somebody goes to not everybody has a Social Security number.
Well, most people should.
I know they should, but not everybody does. And if you're illegal in this country, you're not going to have a Social Security number.
Correct, and you're not also going to be eligible for Medicaid.
Right. But if you listen to all the stories that you hear, it seems that somehow these people circumnavigate that system and they get eligible. How do they do that?
I'm unaware of anybody who's received Medicaid benefits who's an illegal immigrant.
Okay, now we go back and we talk. When you do these seminars, do you think about the 65,000 people? That's what it said to me yesterday. There were 65,000 people on a waiting list for these services in Florida.
That's for the home and community-based services. The nursing home services don't have a waiting list. But if you're looking for services at home or in an assisted living facility, there is a process that you have to go through with the Senior Resource Alliance, and you have to meet one of their 5 criteria to be deemed at risk of nursing home placement. If you meet one of those 5 tests, then you go on a waiting list. They assign you a rating from 1 through 5, 5 being the neediest, 1 being the least needy. And the waiting list is organized with the 5s at the top, the 1s at the bottom. And if you're a 5, being the most needy, you'll probably be on that waiting list less than 6 months. If you're a 1, you could be on that list several years.
Right. But you see, when I ask a question like this, it points out the need for people to understand the differences between what you're talking about this morning, because it is extremely easy for people to get confused about how these systems work together or stay apart.
Well, I think one of the interesting things is if you go north or west of Florida, you cannot get services at home or in an assisted living facility.
Wait a minute, say it again?
If you go north or west of Florida, if you go to Georgia or Alabama, the only place you can get Medicaid services is in a nursing home. So a lot of people in South Georgia and East Alabama cross the state line into Florida because we do offer services at home or in an assisted living facility. Albeit we have that waiting list, but we offer those services. A lot of places, obviously, Georgia and Alabama being 2 of them, do not.
Why is that? Why aren't all states equal, Bill?
I do not know. That you would have to go ask the Georgia or Alabama legislature.
Okay, it goes back to Medicaid is really controlled by each state.
Yes, and to have these home and community-based services, you have to go through a waiver process with the federal government, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid, and if they approve your waiver process, Generally speaking, you have to show that you're going to serve a larger population at a lower cost. They will approve it. So that's kind of how we came into our waiver process.
Okay, like when you give these briefings, I'm sure you get a lot of questions like I'm asking, right?
Yes.
How do you get back on your brief then?
Well, I just seize it away from people like you.
Take it away and go back and get that briefing in, okay?
Well, we talked about the general requirements, but I never got into actually what the income and asset tests are.
Okay.
So generally speaking, we're only going to look at the patient's income, and the income limit is $2,313 a month of gross income. However, if the patient's over that, you can still make them eligible for these services through the use of something called a qualified income trust. Sometimes it's called an income cap trust. And basically, it's a trust we set up, has a bank account. When the person's income comes in, the amount they're over, the $2,313, has to go into that trust each and every month, and magically they're eligible for Medicaid. So the general takeaway is, even though we have an income test, it really doesn't matter because they gave us a workaround on how to get around that test. Now, if you're married, they do not combine your incomes for purposes of the income test. They only look at the patient's income.
I thought that was interesting.
Yep. And then on the asset side of things, generally, the patient can have $2,000 or less in assets. The spouse at home, if there is one, can have up to $126,420 in assets. Certain assets do not count towards these limits. The most notable of those is your house and car. And if you are receiving required distributions out of an IRA or other kind of pension plan, like a 403B or something like that, that will not count. The principal in that will not count as an asset.
I think one thing that when you and I did one of these shows a couple of years ago, the asset amount was $102,000. And this, what you're saying now is that the government continues to look at what's happening in the country and keeps raising these things accordingly.
Correct. The patient limit of $2,000 doesn't move. Right. But the spousal community spouse resource allowance, the $126,420, goes up each year typically. Well, and the income limit also goes up each year.
Okay. But that keeps the person living at home from becoming a burden on society.
Correct. So we have to, because if we had to have them both go down to $2,000, next thing you know, we'd be taking care of two people.
Yeah, and it's we hear too many times that government programs aren't good, but in this case, I think this government program is a good program.
I would agree.
Yeah. Okay, keep going. I'm waiting to talk about something.
We talked about the income limit and the method where you can become eligible if your income's too high. There are certain things you can do with assets that either you convert them from an asset that counts into an asset that doesn't. There are some other rules that can protect assets, and there are ways to move assets out of your estate so they don't count as well. And I think next on our list, Joe, we're going to talk about spousal refusal.
I was waiting for you to talk about that one.
So if you're married and your spouse happens to be in a nursing home, currently under Florida law, if the spouse at home signs a form saying they refuse to legally be obligated to support the spouse in the nursing home, and then the spouse in the nursing home or their power of attorney signs another form assigning their support rights to the state, then in theory the state could come after the well spouse to support the sick spouse. However, the state of Florida doesn't have anybody who does that, and the effect of those two pieces of paper is that the well spouse can have unlimited assets. So let's, for example, say my wife was in a nursing home. We move the assets all into my name. I sign a paper refusing to support her. She signs a paper assigning her support rights to the state of Florida. She can get Medicaid. I could have $10 million. It does not matter. Now, there is a public policy for that. I know that sounds probably insane to most of our viewers, but the public policy about that is to keep people married. Okay?
Is to what?
Keep people married.
Oh, okay. All right.
Because otherwise, what we would do is move all the assets into my name, and then we'd do a sham divorce. And then we would be divorced probably the worst time in her life, because she'd be in a nursing home and not only dealing with her illness, but also dealing with a divorce. So the reason we can do this is that it prevents having to do a divorce. Now, that only works, and you can only do that if the spouse is in a nursing home. So the patient has to be in a nursing home. That doesn't work if they're in assisted living or looking to get care at home. One of the things typically we can also do if the spouse is in a nursing home is something called spousal diversion. Generally speaking, Medicaid's not a free ride. So when the patient's in the nursing home, generally speaking, their income goes to the nursing home and Medicaid pays the difference. Well, if you have the breadwinner in the nursing home, that's going to leave the spouse at home without any income, especially if they have a very low income. So there is a way to divert some of the patient's income from going to the nursing home back to the spouse at home. And what we look at is the spouse at home's income and what we call excess shelter costs, costs associated with running the household, property taxes, insurance, mortgage, rent, flat rate for utilities. We have a formula.
Like
we plug it in.
Ordinary living expenses.
So generally speaking, we can do spousal diversion. However, if you do a spousal refusal for somebody in a nursing home, the spouse at home cannot get spousal diversion. So you can't just have all the assets and get all the income.
No, that wouldn't be right.
So that wouldn't be right. So that's one of the negative factors in doing a spousal refusal. So typically we have to look at whether or not the spouse at home would need the income of the patient's spouse.
Let's go back. Let me ask a question. You made a comment about under the assets that you all of a sudden you dropped and you said, "Oh, gee, well, that person's home could end up with $10 million." Mm-hmm. You remember you mentioned that, and I think a number of people that don't understand what the two of us are trying to talk about this morning. Well, you understand it. I'm trying to understand it, and I'm probably listening. The listeners are trying to understand it too.
Well, normally the spouse at home can have $126,420, but if you do a spousal refusal, there is no cap for the assets of the spouse at home.
When you say when you do a spousal refusal, there's no cap on what the income can be at home.
No, assets, not income.
No, okay. Somebody, in other words, let's say if somebody could give them $1 million, they could put it, they'd be all right.
Well, they can have unlimited assets.
But how? Is there any limitation on how they get or acquire those assets?
Well, in the Medicaid world, you can freely transfer assets between spouses, so there's no problem with that.
But you're assuming then that the spouse that's in the...
I'm assuming that the husband and wife have assets.
Right. Okay. But if you do the spousal refusal and this... I guess I'm confused about who can have how much money.
Generally speaking, the patient can only have $2,000, excluding house and car, and the spouse at home can have up to $126,420. Okay, if either of them exceed those limits, the patient does not get Medicaid. But if you do a spousal refusal, the spouse at home can have more than $126,420.
Okay, I understand that.
Okay.
Now, as an elder law attorney, and I'm sure that you've heard just about everything under the sun about requests you get about moving assets, the look-back period.
Well, we haven't even gotten into that yet, Joe.
I know, but
That's where we're going next.
I got to be a little ahead of you, just a little bit.
Yeah.
But
Well, the look-back period for Medicaid is 5 years.
right.
What does that mean? It means that when you apply for Medicaid, they can go back 5 years to see if you've transferred any assets for less than fair market value. So that would include giving your kids a gift, selling your kid an asset for less than it's worth. So if I had a $25,000 car and I sold it to my son for 10, the difference, $15,000, would be a gift. Or if I just gave my car to my son, that's a gift too. And so when you apply for Medicaid, they ask you if you've made any gifts in the last 5 years. And if you have, you have to divulge that under penalty of felony. And what you do is they will take the value of all the gifts, combine it, and then divide by roughly $9,000. And that's the number of months you're ineligible to get benefits. So let's say I was applying for Medicaid and I had given my kids $90,000 over the last 5 years. They'd take that $90,000 divided by 9,000. The resulting number is 10, and that means I couldn't get Medicaid for 10 months.
You just have to wait for it.
I would have to figure out some other way to pay the bill. So that is why gifting is a particular problem in the Medicaid world, is because people never know when they're going to get sick. And, of course, around 2008, people were giving their kids all kinds of money because people were losing jobs and trying to figure out how to make mortgage payments and all kinds of stuff. And so we had a ton of gifting problems back then. The parents would give money to their kids, and then, maybe a year later they would have a stroke or something, end up in a nursing home, and these gifts they had made would be a problem. Now, under Florida law, you can do something called a personal services contract.
Now, let's don't get into that until we come back to the break, because we're going to take, I think we're going to take it now, John. Yeah, we'll go ahead and take our break now and then get back, and then we can talk about the personal income trust when we come back after the second part of the show. We still got a lot to go, Bill.
We're only halfway through the first page.
Okay.
On 90.3 FM on this Wednesday afternoon, that means it's Joe Steckler and Helping Seniors of Brevard. And here's your host, Joe Steckler.
Thank you, John. We're back live with Bill Johnson, our elder law attorney, who is the panelist for today's show. Folks, you're listening to Helping Seniors, and just to give you an idea of what Helping Seniors does is that if somebody calls us and has a problem with transportation, or they have a problem getting Medicaid help, or they need attorney help, or they don't have how to work through part of the system, they call us and ask us, and we refer them to a resource that we trust that will get their work done. I had a lady yesterday call me that had a Sears product, and it was a small appliance, and they needed some help. And I said, I couldn't find a way to fix it. I refer them to a company called Allied Appliance. And Andy Digman is one of our sponsors in the Senior Services Directory, and that's the kind of work it does. And I know he's honest. I know his dad, and he's done some work for me. So those of you that have had people do good services for them, call us at the office at 473-7770 and tell us you've had somebody you trust that can do good work. We'll see about getting them in our services directory so that we can refer them to the people that call us for help. That's what we're trying to do, build a network of people that can help people. And that's why this guy that's the attorney with me today is one I certainly trust. And I go to him myself, and I'm very careful about where I put my money. And so if I didn't think Bill was honest, if I didn't think he was fair in his pricing, I wouldn't go to him. So I go to him. And we're doing a special show today, and Bill was going to talk about something right before we took the break, but I asked him to wait so we could get into it. You understand the whole thing what he's going to talk about. We're talking about trusts and Medicaid, and we got a whole ball of wax we're trying to roll into one, so help you understand it. Go ahead, Bill.
I was going to say that's a great segue, Joe, because I want to point out one thing. Everything we're talking about today is legal. It's not like we're trying to pull the wool over the Department of Children and Families' eyes or anything. In fact, they see everything that I'm talking about. They see the spousal refusal. They see the personal services contract. All this is given to them. So I just want folks to understand there's no trickery going on here. We're not trying to pull a fast one on the state. These are just the state rules in Florida.
Well, and that's something I always try to say. You beat me to it, but we wouldn't talk about something that's illegal, Bill. That'd be the dumbest thing we could do. I could lose the show. You could lose your license to practice law.
That's right, Joe.
So it's not worth it.
Correct.
So, it's a dumb thing to do.
I'm glad we got that out of the way.
Yeah, okay. Now go ahead. But
okay.
But one more comment. You know, the state of Florida and our federal government are pretty smart in some things because they do design some things that help people work through a very, very difficult system. And that's exactly what you do as an LO law attorney. This system is not something that's easy.
It is not easy.
Right.
Yeah, it is quite difficult.
Okay, now having said that, you go ahead.
I would not want to be 90 years old with my spouse in a nursing home trying to figure this out on my own.
It would be very difficult.
Yes.
Yes. And I get questions like that, Bill. And what do I do with them? I call Melanie in your office, or I call somebody else about something else, and I get the answers I need, and I can tell people what to do.
Correct.
Okay, go.
Okay, so right before the break, we were talking about personal care contracts, and we were talking about the look-back period and how the look-back period applies to gifts. And the gift is defined as a transfer for less than fair market value. So the way a personal services contract works is you don't give your kids your money. You basically hire your kids. And you hire them to help manage your health care and your finances. And we draw up a contract. They commit to doing X number of hours a week. Generally, Medicaid says we can charge about $25 an hour for their non-professional services. And we do a little computation, say they were going to do 20 hours a week times $25 an hour. That's $500 a week times 52 weeks in a year is $26,000. And then they're going to agree to do those 20 hours a week for the rest of your life. Well, Social Security has a life expectancy table. It says, say I was a 76-year-old male. It says my life expectancy is roughly 10 years. So that $26,000 a year, we can multiply by 10, and that turns into $260,000. So I could prepay my kids $260,000 in return for them doing 20 hours a week for the rest of my life. And Medicaid is okay with that. And as long as we do that calculation and we don't do a duplication of services. It can't be the same services what the nursing home or assisted living is doing. Now, the downside to a personal services contract is whoever receives that money has to pay income tax. Anytime you get paid for a service, that's taxable income to you, so they do have to pay income tax on that money.
But that's not bad, though, Bill. Think about it for a minute. By doing a personal services contract, the person is able to keep someone that they love, and they know that they want to care for them in most cases. Correct.
And they get to pick their family member as a caregiver,
right.
And be involved and get how many adult children do we know, Joe, who've given up careers to come and take care of their parents?
I hear it all the time, Bill. And think about this for a second. Let's say that person was going to earn was getting a $50,000 job. They give up a $50,000 a year job, and they acquire a $25,000 income of caring for somebody and their family, and in the long run, when they get 10, 15 years down the road, how have they done about putting anything into a 401k or planning for their own personal retirement?
Correct.
It's a problem.
Yes, it is. So we use a personal services contract if somebody is over assets, and just a reminder what the asset limits are: $2,000 for the patient, $126,420 for the spouse at home if there is one. And if somebody's over on assets, we can use a personal services contract to move it out to the children in return for them agreeing to take care and manage the health care and finances of the parent. Obviously, if they're going to put hours in, they got to be local. We can't be doing 40 hours for some kid in New York to take care of a parent in Brevard,
Right.
So that just doesn't fly.
Who checks that?
Who checks that? The Department of Children and Families checks that. Yeah, if you put some ridiculous amount of hours, like 80 hours, or you put 40 hours for somebody who lives in California to do something for somebody in Florida, they will flag that.
I understand.
Okay. The other thing a lot of people don't realize is that rental property does not count as an asset in the Medicaid world. So, for example, I had a lady come to me, it must have been 10 years ago. Her husband was in a nursing home. The nursing home sent her to me to get him on Medicaid. And the first thing out of her mouth, she said, was, I don't think we'll qualify. We have too much in assets. And I said, well, what do you have as far as assets go? And she goes, well, we have 5 rental houses. And I told her, they don't count as assets. So under the Medicaid rules, rental property does not count as an asset. It's one of the quirks of Medicaid. So we wanted to make sure the rental income went to her at home, because remember, Medicaid only tests the patient's income.
Right.
So we wanted the rent income to go to her because they don't test it. And also that means the rental income does not become part of what they call the patient responsibility amount. In other words, going to the nursing home.
Is this where this EPIC
Yeah.
comes in?
Well, there are a couple different organizations out there that
Well, we're on the second page.
that do turnkey rentals for people applying for Medicaid. So if you're over on assets, you could get with one of these companies, and what they would do is you could invest in a rental property. You don't have to use these companies. I have lots of clients who do it on their own. They're over by $100,000 in assets. They go out and buy a condo and rent it. There's nothing that says you have to use a company to buy a rental property. But a lot of people who are over on assets, they go out and purchase a rental property either through one of these programs or on their own, and they get a tenant, and the rent income comes in, and that rental property does not count as an asset.
But the income from the rental property pay, that goes into...
If it goes to the patient, usually that'll get wrapped up in if the patient's in a nursing home, that ends up going to the nursing home as part of patient responsibility. If the patient's married, we would want the rental income to go to the spouse at home.
Yeah. But would it make any sense for a person that's in nursing home, if I say it's a single person had all kind of money like that, to go ahead and do an EPIC?
Well, all they do is facilitate the purchase of a rental property.
Okay.
And then they rent it from you immediately, which makes it nice, because to be a rental property, it has to be rented.
Right.
And they act as your first tenant, and then they sublease it. So, but when you buy the rental through them, they rent it from you immediately, and then they look for to sublease it. Whereas if you bought a rental on your own, then you got to go find a tenant, and then if something breaks in the rental, you got to go fix it, and they kind of take all the headaches out of that.
Well, let's say that somebody has a sizable chunk of money and they want to and all these things that you and I are talking about today happens to him, how could they legally, and I think in the true spirit of trying to be fair, how could they take those assets, whatever they might be, how they might acquire them, how could they, or where would they place them in order to maximize the amount of money that would go to heirs?
So you're meaning if they had somebody had a long-term care event?
Yeah.
And they were, if they're single, you're pretty much looking at either homestead. Remember I told you one house on limited value typically is exempt. Or you're looking at doing rental property, or you're moving the money with a personal services contract.
How about if there's
if you're married, it depends where the patient is. If the patient's in a nursing home, you're looking at doing a spousal refusal. If they're outside of a nursing home, then you would be back to those three other ones.
Okay. Let's say a person...
Now, sometimes, Joe, it makes no sense to do any of this planning.
What would that be?
Well, let's say I have a single person, they got $500,000 of assets, and it's all in the stock market, okay? Well, one, if we were going to go, let's say, buy a rental property, we would have to sell all those stocks, which incurs a capital gain.
Right.
And the tax implications may outweigh the benefit of getting the person on Medicaid. So, and there's also a cost with, buying any sort of real estate. You're going to pay anywhere from 6 to 8% in closing costs.
I guess if a person was single, Bill, and had $500,000 in the bank, and they had Social Security coming in, and they were faced with being in an assisted living facility the rest of their life at a cost of $50,000, $60,000 a year, they ought to be happy they got the $500,000 to a combination of what you would make on that plus what you'd expend from that, and you're so going to be happy to have that.
I would agree with you because one is you don't have to go on a waiting list, A. Right. B, you get to pick. Not every assisted living facility deals with a Medicaid provider. So, a lot of the very nicer ones do not. So if you have money, you get to pick where you want to go. Whereas if you are looking for Medicaid to help supply or pay for services at assisted living, you've got to go to one that has a contract with one of the Medicaid providers. So if you're single, you do have a lot more options if you have your own money. Now, the argument is, who are we protecting the money for is a little different if you're single than if you're married. If you're married, obviously, we're protecting the money for your spouse,
right,
who may have 20, 30 years yet to live.
Okay.
I could be, 65 in a nursing home. My spouse may live to 100. So every nickel counts in a situation like that. What if I'm gone? Then they're going to have to live off these assets, and if I didn't have a survivor benefit on, my pension or something, their income's going to go down. So there is, some dire repercussions of me going in a nursing home and then potentially passing away, especially if I'm, blowing through all the assets that we both accumulated. Now, if you're single, the argument gets a little weaker, I think, because you're protecting the assets for the heirs.
Yeah, well, I know exactly what
So, yeah, sometimes it is, if you had a single person with $500,000, they're better off probably paying their own way and picking a place where they want to be and go.
Right.
The problem is, as you know, that some of these people last forever. I have people who've been in assisted livings for 8, 10 years, and, at 50, 60 grand a year, they've gone through most of their money.
Bill, I think when I had the Alzheimer's programs years ago that I had a gentleman that came in to see me, and we talked much about what you're talking about right now. And he was married, and he loved his wife. and he put his wife in one of the best places available in Brevard County. And I said, you know, this is going to deplete your assets. He says, I've got a lot, Joe. I said, I know you've got a lot, but what happens if you live much longer?
Well,
he did live longer, and all his money was gone. But he said, and he came to see me when he was going to have to go in. He says, I know you talked to me about this years ago. He said, but this is what I wanted for her.
Right.
And he says, I'll take what I get.
Well, I think one thing our viewers really probably don't have, listeners, probably don't have any appreciation of is how much long-term care costs. We probably should talk about that because according to a MetLife study, most Americans underestimate the cost of long-term care. And for the folks out there, you know, a basic assisted living facility, room and board, is about $3,600 a month. And then they assess you, and depending on how much assistance you need, you could pay anywhere from $0 to another $2,000 a month. So it's not unusual to see assisted living bills around $4,000 to $5,000 a month for somebody who needs quite a bit of assistance. Now, if you're talking about nursing homes in Brevard County, they're all getting around $275 to $300 a day. That equates to $8,000 to $10,000 a month. That's a whole nother animal, and not many people can afford to spend that kind of money on a monthly basis for very long. Of course, home health care, you can never tell. It depends on how much care you need.
Right.
You know, if you just need somebody to come and cook and clean once a week, you're going to be at the low end. But if you need skilled nursing level services at your house, you know, Joe, you know, you can expect to probably pay $10,000 a month for that.
Yes, you will.
I mean, I've seen $15,000 to $20,000 a month home health care bills for people.
I know a case where it cost, and this is 25 years ago, where it cost $288,000 to keep a guy who was a retired colonel in the Air Force. He developed Lou Gehrig's disease. He wanted to stay at home, and I can certainly understand a person with Lou Gehrig's disease wanting to stay at home where his family could be around him all the time, because I had a good friend die of ALS, so I know exactly what it is. And I know that the VA paid $288,000 to keep that man in his home. So I think it's all a question of what the disease is, how we can care for people. But
well, one of the unique things in Florida is we talked about the home and community-based services. So you can get services at home or in an assisted living facility or at a nursing home. So you are not necessarily forced into a nursing home. If you want the home and community-based services, you do have to put up with that waiting list. But if you get on there and you have a need, you can get services at home, which is important because, you know, you talk to 90% of the people, they all want to stay home. Now, there is a federal case out there called the Olmstead case, which was a lawsuit brought in federal court that says that they cannot discriminate against you based on where you want to get your care. It was brought under the American with Disabilities Act. So you do not have to or cannot be forced by Medicaid into a nursing home. You can get that care at home through Medicaid.
okay, I understand.
Now, they're very reluctant to give you that care, the providers. They would rather you be in a more intensive situation, but under Olmstead, they can't discriminate against you.
But, Bill, how about in the case if a doctor prescribes skilled nursing care 3 days a week, and if that person, you know, they can't do anything, they're at home, but they need that skilled nursing care. I have never heard of a limit as to how long that skilled nursing care could come to home. And the reason I'm saying
under Medicaid, if the doctor says you need this, they will come out, whoever the provider is, And they will, of course, try to lowball you because the less they give you, the more they make. But if you have like something from your physician that you need 3 days of nursing care and whatever else of homemaker companion services, you can haggle with them. And I've had some people get quite a lot of hours out of their providers. Now that's the exception rather than the rule, and you have to know how to go about doing that.
Right, and that's where a combination, I think, of an organization like Helping Seniors, knowing what an attorney like you can do, plus knowing how the system works. Like everything you and I are talking about right now is adjudicated or managed by Aging Matters here in Brevard County. And there are a number of folks, if you got a problem about what Bill and I are talking about, you can call 639-8770 and ask about the managed care program because they have to tell you.
Mm-hmm.
And
well, I was going to say the eligibility is determined by the Department of Children and Families. The Medicaid providers are governed by the Agency for Healthcare Administration.
Right. I mentioned a couple of phone numbers. I gave Aging Matters out. Folks, if you want to talk to Bill Johnson, call his office. And I know Bill gives a free 1-hour consultation. And it hurts him if he schedules a consultation and he sets the time aside in his busy day. And last week you had somebody you scheduled for him and they didn't show up. So it hurts. But his number, if you want to get some good answers, to call us 253. Area code now is 321-253-1667. That's the number I put in my memory box a long time ago, Bill. A long time. And see, that's how long I've known you.
Yeah, it's way too long.
A long time. But if we could know each other that long again on top of what we've known, golly Moses, I could probably be driving a Corvette Stingray by now. Holy smokes. The other phone number, we're down to 1 minute, folks, and all joking aside, the phone number for our organization, Helping Seniors, is 321-473-770. Bill is 321-253-1667. And if you got a problem, call us because we can do what we can in order to direct you to where you need to go. Thank you, Bill. I always enjoy having you on the show because, frankly, I always learn a lot, too.
Very good, Joe. Thank you.
You're right. Welcome. Bye-bye.